Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto. My co-host, Michael Byrd.
As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. This season's theme is hard conversations. We've been taking real client stories and scrubbing their names and building these stories around confronting and having hard conversations. Now, Brad, they don't all have great outcomes, but we've had plenty of teachable moments, and we'll have another one today.
You know, Michael, I can always tell when we're in the last show of the season when the intro sounds starting to sound old, much like you, old.
Brad, for once, I'm actually happy that you're making fun of me for my age. And YouTube's probably really confused. Yes, I'm not the one. Michael's the one with not gray hair, even though he's calling me old, but it's okay. So we've had a lot of funny conversations lately at the office about generational communication differences.
Okay, boomer.
Well, as you know, Brad, I'm a card-carrying Gen Xer, and I tend to have a lot of ammunition about the different communications that happen by generation with my 5 kids plus my 2 new bonus kids that my kids have gotten married. So I've got a lot of generational perspective in the birdhouse.
Yeah, you're like the regular United Nations, all the new languages you probably have to learn as your kids with different generational languages.
We had the whole family at the house over Christmas. My adult kids in from out of town, spouses, and one of the funniest bonding moments was listening to them all start going back and forth with each other over the emotional scars that they still carry to this day from a dad text response that says, okay, period.
I don't understand.
Well, apparently using punctuation in a text message, Brad, is a major trauma. And the recipient, especially if the recipient is, or if a recipient is a millennial or a Gen Z, for us Gen Xers, we just call it grammar.
Okay, so Michael, there's a period for me saying okay because I want you to suffer a little trauma, but of course, no offense intended.
Well, thanks for qualifying that. Yes. So I'm not allowed to be offended. Okay,
no offense intended.
I expect nothing less, Brad. Well, let's keep this generational differences going with a little talk on communications through emojis. Tell the audience, Brad, what are the most common emojis that you use?
It really is dependent on what's happening, but definitely one of my favorite go-to is the smiley face with the teeth, which I always thought was being like mysterious, but which I learned now actually means the emoji means you're worried. So I'm not worried. But my favorite one I think is the rat emoji. It's my version of when I'm trying to curse. There's a movie I grew up where someone yells out rats. And so rats is my curse word with a rat. And if I'm really mad, I drop 2 rats in the text, which means double rats. So, really crazy stuff over here. How about you, Mike? What is the most common emoji that you use?
I have to say, first of all, I've heard you say words that were not rats before.
Yes. Well, I said in texting.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. I use the crying face emoji, the crying laughing face emoji, the thumbs up, the fist bump, and the heart emoji for my wife.
Sweet.
And I'm not afraid to mix them up. I'll go searching for the right emoji for the right moment. But those are my most common ones.
Yeah, Michael, you're just crazy like that. And I'm sure your kids, actually both their kids were listening, or all their kids were listening to the show. They heard what you just said. They probably all give us their version of wherever the thumbs down is if they hear their old men talking about emojis. Yeah,
it'd be as they would say, cringe-worthy moment. Well, yes, all the emojis we use are lame, Brad. They communicate. When we use these, the message they receive is that we're old.
Oh, that's shocking.
One of the most popular emojis used by the younger generation is the skull.
Well, I love Halloween, so I do drop the skull a lot. mostly during Saints games with my buddies all across the country. And when things aren't looking good, I drop a skull. So I must be in the in crowd now, Michael.
No, Brad, you're embarrassing yourself again.
Oh, no.
The skull actually replaces the crying, laughing face emoji. This is, I am laughing so hard that I'm dead.
Well, I just escalated very quickly there.
Yeah, we're probably hopeless, but we got to make some progress here. Okay. So let's move on to generational differences with jargon.
Okay. I think you're kind of dating yourself there by even using the word jargon.
Okay, well, fair point. And the last time I used that word was a long time ago. So maybe I should just said slang. But I'm gonna give you a quiz this time.
I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what the word Riz means?
Yes, it stands for the hotel I like to stay in when I'm feeling wealthy. It's the Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah. No. And I actually, this whole conversation started when one of our favorite podcasts, Smartless, and I heard them reference this. And I walked in and I asked Riley, who's her desk was right near my office, and she looked at me blank face. She didn't know it either. That's the difference even between, my teenage kids and the 20-somethings.
Okay.
And so Riz apparently is kind of short for charisma. And so if someone has Riz, they've got that kind of it factor.
Well, in my defense, if Riley doesn't know it, I should not be in trouble.
Oh, I took great comfort that she didn't know. I was like, because I felt really, really lame. But here's some other words that are kind of these are.
You are lame, but no, Riley's not. Okay.
Yeah, I felt better at the moment. Okay. So here's some. These are mostly teenager words, but some of them are for the 20-somethings as well.
Okay.
Have you heard the term bussin'?
No.
Okay. Slaps?
No.
Stan?
It's a guy named Stan. Mr. Stan?
No. Slay?
I have heard that
Okay.
one.
Glow up? Bet?
No.
Sus?
No, not really.
Main character?
When I'm writing a play, maybe?
Do you know what a Karen is?
I do.
Okay. All right.
Well, I don't know, Michael. It kind of felt like you're doing a lot of phonic reading or writing there. All those sounds you made. I think slay, if I knew, it used to mean like looking hot or looking good, but someone recently told me that doesn't mean that anymore. And I have no idea what you just said, honestly. Except I think I heard Brad is better than you, maybe. However, I have a confession, Michael. You told me that you were going to throw a bunch of words at me, and I couldn't go research this area, so I didn't. But this morning when I was preparing for the podcast, I happened to ask my daughter if she had heard any of those words before. In full disclosure, my daughter Madeline's only 14, so she knew every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned a couple what the phrases meant. So I did cheat a little bit.
Okay, well, go ahead.
But without her, I would have had no clue.
I'm going to give, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, and I would say this, though, and maybe you should. I did learn that what sus meant. And when I showed her the word, I found out that you misspelled it.
Oh, well, excuse me. Is it just S-U-S?
Yes.
Yeah. I wrote it S-U-S-S on our show notes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so
okay.
That's the only thing I wanted to offer you was that we were trying to be cool, we still messed up.
Oh, I definitely fell out of my comfort zone.
So please help the audience out since we have all these words.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I'm going to tell you what I understand them to be. Okay. So bussin' is something that it's great. Usually it's talked about in context of food. So this food is bussin'. Okay. Actually, slaps is the same in my understanding of it. So this food slaps.
Okay.
This food's bussin'. Same thing. Stan is like you stand. I stand the ByrdAdatto legal 1, 2, 3s with ByrdAdatto. You're a follower, a loyal follower.
All right.
Slay is outdated now, apparently. So we'll move on from that. Bet is like saying yes, but you're kind of trying to be cool about it. My freshman in college says that all the time. You're like, you ready to go? Bet.
Is it like you bet?
Kind of frat boy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sus. Guy cheat. It's off suspicious. So if someone is sus. Yeah. And then a Karen, probably most people know that, but that's kind of that reference to that kind of mom at a restaurant that's complaining about the food or complaining about the bill, or just in general complaining. And then we talked about main character, and that's kind of someone where the spotlight's on them. It's used in context a lot to social media, like who's the main character, like yeah.
Okay.
So that's the best I can do, man.
I'm not sure I feel any better yet, Michael, but I'm glad you did not ask our research assistant Siri these questions. Siri might have. I recommend you go to a speech therapist if you asked her any of those questions.
And probably no teenagers are listening, so they won't be able to correct us. So
there you go.
We're okay. Well, Brad, let's slay this story and hope that everyone will stand the legal 1, 2, 3s with ByrdAdatto.
Yes, as the cool kids say now, bet.
Okay. I don't think you pulled that off.
No.
Our client today and today's story, Brad, was unfortunately not one of the kindest people.
No.
And that's actually putting it nicely.
Yes, it is.
We are going to call her Dr. Karen.
Yeah. And Michael, I do hope anyone listening does not think we're actually using the person's real name, since you just completely completely emoji talk, and now you're using these new words. So you've already said that Dr. Karen is probably meaning that someone that's not a Karen person.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Dr. Karen was vocal about the fact in this story that, and to us, that she did not like to pay taxes.
Yeah, I remember. And then we basically try to duck and cover whenever she go on these rants about not wanting to pay taxes.
The federal government and what they're doing. Yeah. Well, we did not know this, but Dr. Karen met a tax attorney, and that tax attorney told her that he could set her up so she did not have to pay any taxes.
You mean, sorry for the audience, I think you meant lower her taxes, right?
No, Brad, no taxes. And it probably won't surprise you, but we will call this attorney Mr. Suss.
Oh, yeah. Well, audience members, I did get to meet Mr. Suss at one point, and it's pretty much a perfect name for him.
Well, apparently Mr. Suss had a convoluted model, and he actually used the MSO model, which we've talked about on prior shows.
Yeah.
But he would use various entities and asset transfers that would magically allow all the income have an offsetting expense to it, so that it could be deducted, so that ultimately at the end, magically there would be no tax owed.
So many tax attorneys and CPAs will, they work with their clients on avoidance strategies, which for audience members, developing a plan of action that takes, less tax liability and maximize your after tax income. But, according to Mr. Suss, he had a revenue ruling against the IRS, which developed like this complex plan of actions, which allowed multiple separate companies to be formed with multiple different arrangements and agreements with each company, allowing individuals to pay less tax. And as you have mentioned, in many circumstances, no taxes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I forgot to mention one important piece of information. Dr. Karen had already signed up with Mr. Suss and had paid over $150,000 to have him set this model up, and as I said, signed all the documents and agreed to pay an annual fee of nearly $100,000 for Mr. Suss to maintain this compliant, in quotes, IRS model.
Michael, maybe we should have become tax attorneys.
Yeah, I mean, those dollar numbers look pretty good.
Yeah, no doubt.
There were multiple layers of issues with this new information we got from our client. I mean, we were practice attorneys for them, and we just found out that there was this brand new corporate structure that was super complicated, and it actually affected the structure of the medical practice.
Yep.
And this new model that Mr. Suss had put together was done so without any regard to the other relationships and healthcare relationships that Dr. Karen was a part of through her practice. And I know, at one point you became involved, and I remember we both had the same reaction to this no taxes news.
Yeah, and as mentioned earlier, we are not tax attorneys. As such, we cannot really determine if this developed, as they were developing this model, was it really compliant with the IRS? Mr. Suss, kept citing that he had authority that it was good.
Yeah, I remember being very thankful for what I'm about to say is that around this time you jumped in to take lead on reviewing these documents from Mr. Suss. They're a big stack of documents. That's how I would characterize it.
Yep.
And as you said, we're not a tax attorneys, but it had the feeling of a convoluted MSO model, and we know how to build those. So we figured at the very least we could figure out what was supposed to be happening.
Yeah, and as you said, we are business and healthcare attorneys, so we spend a lot of time analyzing regulatory laws, and then in our case, folding them into the business model with obviously healthcare issues around them. And I was working with an associate to review, and the further we went into this model, the more confusing it got. The associate had a ton of follow-up questions with me, and the more I learned, the more I started seeming like this might not be a tax avoidance strategy, but really more of a tax evasion. And I'm going to use this quote, air quote, strategy, meaning that they're not going to pay taxes at all, or deliberately underpaying or not paying taxes. And we just could not figure it out. And the form, as y'all probably have heard me talk about, just doesn't really be seen to be matching the substance behind it.
So this isn't good news as you're looking at this, and were fully in charge at this point of kind of the taking lead on this project. Was there a hard conversation?
And I'll just say this, unfortunately, yes. Sometimes you're the bearer of bad news. And I think you ended up kindly passing me the hot potato.
And happily.
Because it was pretty sad circumstances once you started going through it. And so I ended up having to have that hard conversation with Dr. Karen.
Dun, dun, dun. Brad glowed up and became the main character in today's story. You, Brad, put your big boy pants on to talk to Dr. Karen. How did it go?
Yeah, not great.
Oh,
Dr. Karen, she was very invested in this theory, and she put a lot of money and time into this tax avoidance strategy where she didn't have to pay taxes. And she really wanted us to confirm it was perfectly legit. As I started asking her more questions in the model and what services these companies were provided, and who was she hiring them, and she kept diverting every single answer back to Mr. Suss, who just kept saying, it's okay, it's fine, it's fine. And finally I had to let Dr. Karen know that this model appeared to have no substance, and the outcome for her would not likely end well. Dr. Karen pushed back a lot. She had known another ton of other doctors and well-respected business people that are hiring Mr. Suss, and so clearly I was not understanding them.
Well, Brad, there's a lot to digest here, and that was definitely not a pleasant outcome for Dr. Karen. Let's go to commercial and learn some legal lessons on the other side. I want to find out what happened with Dr. Karen.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123's the ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, this season, if you don't know this by now, our theme has been hard conversations. And hopefully, this has not been a hard conversation for many of you older listeners to follow, since we keep dropping so many crazy jargons or slangs in the show. But Michael, today's story is really about hard conversations sometimes we have to have with our own clients. And Dr. Karen is a well-respected physician, and she can be very intimidating because she likes what she likes, and she doesn't like being pushed back. And she doesn't like hearing no, which again, we're not saying we like saying no to our clients either, but especially if everyone else is doing it.
Yeah. And let's recap. So, going back, Dr. Karen was our client, and we were, did the traditional business structuring, health, represented her medical practice, and we get some news out of the blue that she had signed on for a convoluted tax strategy to pay zero taxes.
Yeah.
And we learned that the tax attorney, Mr. Suss, had had her sign a ton of corporate documents that affected significantly the model for Dr. Karen. And so kind of the big point of the story was your realization that she had herself in a hot mess, and there was some problems. Even not being a tax attorney, you knew that this was not good, and you had to become the main character, at least for the moment. And was it your daughter says?
I was about to have my main character moment.
Okay, you got to have it, and you had to go to someone, as you said, does not like to hear what she doesn't want to hear.
Yeah,
and you had to tell her that.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll just take a big step out of the story. You know, our job as attorneys is, generally speaking, is we're supposed to look at the law, look at the facts surrounding the law, and then describe what we see. And, you know, I know sometimes our clients get frustrated, or you listeners, you probably get frustrated with your attorneys and say, I just want to know yes or no. And unfortunately, sometimes there's shades of gray out there. And as we're going through these shades, you know, some people are terrified and they want to be as compliant as possible. Other people aren't. And as many of you probably have heard me say, you know, there's a lot of risk out there. And so some people are afraid to step out of the shower in the morning, and other people will jump out of a perfectly good airplane. And that difference in that risk is hard for us as attorneys to know. Now, obviously, if we say, hey, this is orange jumpsuit bad, do not do this, and you continue to pursue that path, very high likelihood, at least at our firm and many firms I know, they'll disengage with you.
Yeah.
But if it's, hey, these are the things to think about, it's a little bit harder to kind of walk around. Or again, we're supposed to counsel you through that.
So you had your plan, you had your conversation. How did you handle the fire that came back from Dr. King?
Yeah, honestly, it was a very tough circumstances I was under. Again, I'll say it one more time: we're not tax attorneys, and so we were already at a disadvantage in this entire model, entire situation. Dr. Karen really wanted us to know the answer, and it had been fine and dandy up to this point that the model had. And Mr. Suss recommended it, so it had to be great. And you know, again, you know, we're just simple regulatory attorneys, right? And we're in the healthcare. So I just said, I'm going to stick in my healthcare regulatory lane. I'm going to tell you how I would apply this with my healthcare knowledge, and I'll also apply how the federal government reacts to certain models. And ultimately, we were able to at least provide her advice that, even if it was not what she wanted to hear, it was the advice that we had to have. And this is unfortunately how we had to handle this hard conversation.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, for me, you know, I can relate. They're called hard conversations for a reason. I think the biggest challenge for me is that they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I know when I'm going to upset someone or let someone down that I have this deep urge inside of me to avoid it. But yet that's part of our job.
Yes.
And so, you know, the easy answer, it's not easy, is it just takes practice. Yep. And an understanding that you're doing more harm than good if you don't have that conversation. It's necessary. That's what that's our role with our clients at times, is to, you know, let them know what the situation is, even if it's not what they want to hear.
Yeah. So for our audience, maybe you can give some common scenarios.
Well, in the healthcare compliance world, it's really common because we can routinely, a client will come to us with something they're doing already or wanting to do that if they were in any other industry would make perfectly great business sense. And yet in healthcare, we can immediately recognize that there's a compliance issue. And sometimes, you know, it's jarring, unexpected news that, you know, they're like joyfully, oh, wow, I just started my business, my dream. And then you have to tell them, well, it's illegal.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are times when we're sharing some shocking news.
Yeah. And, you know, unfortunately, we hear some people say that we're crushing their dreams. And we sometimes, unfortunately, you know, we have to kind of laugh a little bit about just to cope about the heaviness of having to have this trail of tears in the wake of certain healthcare arrangement. I mean, clearly we want them to fulfill their dream, but and especially as business attorneys, our first desire is to make the deal work. However, we are handcuffed in the sense that we have no control over the rules and regulations. And if the model is not compliant in one way, it doesn't mean that we couldn't find other ways to make that happen. And, obviously we want that dream to work for the individual ultimately at the end.
Yeah. I mean, the good news, as you said, we're business attorneys. And so we are solution oriented. And often, most of the time, actually, there's a path to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. And so once, you work through the emotional shock of the hard conversation, ultimately our clients are grateful that we kind of redirected them and found a different way to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and honestly, those are conversations I do love because we are able to get past the pain of the model not being exactly the way they wanted the model to be, but realizing they still could be successful. And we're happy to be part of their team to make that happen for them in a compliant way.
Well, so Brad, everybody's curious. What ended up happening with Dr. Karen and her arrangement with Mr. Suss?
Sadly, I was correct that this model was not a tax avoidance strategy, but a tax evasion strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just tell the audience what happens is normally happens in these circumstances. There was a criminal defendant who got popped for doing some bad things in healthcare. And he said, well, gosh, if you think this is bad, y'all should meet my accountant or my tax attorney and if I go and turn evidence over, well, can I get a lesser sentence? And so sure enough, this other individual ended up bringing in Mr. Suss and the federal government started investigating Mr. Suss. And in doing so, it blew up. Our client, Dr. Karen, ended up having to pay massive tax fines for failure to make payments because her model was non-compliant at all. And unfortunately, we've learned of many other individuals in the area who followed up, who had done the same thing and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in late fees on top of their taxes they owed. And although it was bad for Dr. Karen to have to pay all those back taxes, Mr. Suss made national news, and it's kind that you don't really want because he was arrested and indicted on numerous counts for his role in this, as they say, scheme involving creating shell companies, false reporting expenses to the IRS, and to help his clients dodge taxes. He faced a host of issues, including wire fraud and preparing fraudulent income tax returns. And according to the indictment, Mr. Suss created all these shell companies, quote unquote, providing services that really weren't there. And the federal government accused him of even creating operating agreements and service agreements and invoices and annuities, all in ways to legitimately hide the money. Final thoughts?
Yeah, well, it sounds first, Brad, like Mr. Suss kind of evolved to being Mr. Khan. But we're at the end of our season, and so my final thoughts may be a little broader even than today. And it's just we've had this entire season surrounding hard conversations, and they're as we said, hard for a reason, and they're conversations. So there's a communication element, and so we've had a lot of fun with kind of the generational differences. Yet we have to recognize we're going to have hard conversations with people from different generations. And, it's pretty telling to think that, if I'm typing a text to say, okay, I have this deep urge because I'm Gen X to put a period at the end of it because grammar, and I know my wife would have my back on that, who's also Gen X. Yet we have an impact on someone from a different generation with how we communicate. And so I think there's a lesson to be learned for all of us as we are having hard conversations with people from different generations to kind of be able to meet them where they are, and in the words we use, and if we're texting, which by the way, don't have a hard conversation by text.
Yes.
But the messaging can make a difference on your ability to connect and work through whatever the issue is.
Excellent. Well, Michael, can you believe it? It's over. That is the end of season 11 of League 123s with ByrdAdatto. But audience members, do not panic. We will have a preview of season 12 next Wednesday.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.